All right, welcome everybody to Ask Me Anything, the free-form Q&A with smart people from Santa Barbara's arts and culture scene who've got stories to tell. I'm Casey Caldwell, the managing director of the Arts Collaborative and Community Arts Workshop. This episode is generously sponsored by Sullivan Goss and American Gallery, and we are very grateful for the support. Our guests today are Doug Uyesaka and Michael Irwin. We're looking at a slideshow of their work right now. I will de-share the screen and we'll be able to see a little bit more of their faces in just a second. But thank you so much, Doug and Michael, for joining us today.
Our pleasure, my pleasure. Thanks.
Yeah.
And we'll keep looking at their work for a little bit while I introduce them a bit, and then we'll turn to the conversation and questions from everyone. Doug Uyesaka has been a working artist involved in the Santa Barbara art scene since the 1970s. He teaches art at Laguna Blanca School, and in 2009 was the recipient of the Laguna Blanca School Faculty Excellence Award for the middle school, in addition to a William T. Colville Grant. In 2010, he was awarded the Individual Artist Award for Assemblage and Collage by the Arts Fund. And in 2016, he had a mid-career survey, long story short, at the Westmont Museum of Art. Michael Irwin is an artist and educator who's lived and worked in Santa Barbara for over 40 years. He's taught at UCSB and City College and shown his artworks in banks and galleries throughout the West, and his work is in collections across the country. Michael has maintained a studio in the Funk Zone for 35 years. So Doug and Michael have said that they'd be happy to answer questions on any variety of topics, including art making, teaching, and Santa Barbara art scene history. I've gotten a couple of questions in ahead of time from folks who emailed them in, so thanks very much for those. We'll get to those in just a second. I've prepared a few questions, and folks should please feel free to submit questions whenever they occur to you in the comments feature right here on Facebook, and I'll pass them on to Doug and Michael. So that intro done, and Doug and Michael work, got a little sample of their work. I'm gonna turn it over to us. So Doug and Michael, hi, thanks very much. How I'll get started is I've started these last few interviews just by, I'm trying to get a sense for each of the artists of kind of where all this got started for them, you know, like the origins of their creative practice and their work. I've asked some kind of a question about like their first experience of art as a kid, or like that, or even more basically like that first moment of just kind of getting completely sucked in by any sort of subject, you know, like, oh, look at that. Like, what's that? So I guess that question is like, what is the first memory you have of something that you got kind of completely pulled into, absorbed by, curious about?
Mike, you want to start?
Okay.
Yeah. All right.
Okay. I don't know. I've always been fearless when it came to building things. I think I shaped my first surfboard when I was 11 and glassed it and made the fin and did all that kind of stuff. I can remember before school in first grade, waiting for the bus, carving dirt clods with popsicle sticks, you know, really big, important things like that. but just, you know, just trying to make something interesting and do something with it. But I've always been wanting to make something different. And so here I am 100 years later, still doing it.
Out of the cave and into the studio.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
I think for me too, I started out when I was a kid too. So we both grew up 50s, 60s, and, you know, a lot of pop culture, TV was coming on. And so seeing cartoons and then comic books and stuff like that. And then we lived way in the hell out in the country. So there wasn't a lot to do. So we used to run around a lot. And when you said the dirt clod things, we used to carve dirt clod and make these little cities, and then you bomb them, you know, being boys, you just destroy it after you made it and all this stuff. And I think it was just that whole, and things were a lot more hands-on too. You know, I think in school you had a big red Indian pencil that you wrote on that manila light striped paper, and just making those marks was something that I really got into. And then copying cartoon figures a lot and little images I saw in books and magazines a lot. And that's how I got started. I just like making stuff. Culturally, it wasn't that rich of an environment. We had some art in the house, but it was mostly just remember just a Japanese scroll that I was really enthralled with, just wondering how they made the brushstrokes and stuff. But yeah, not a lot, not a lot of museums or galleries or anything. But
yeah, I mean, so for both of you, it's not like you were like immersed in art as a kid, or it was just you found the way to be curious. You kind of started making things, and that just sort of set you on a trajectory that's led you to the kind of work you do today.
Yeah, definitely.
It's been interesting. I remember I took my first ceramics class at Orange Coast College, and after the first couple of weeks, I came home and built a 40 cubic foot kiln in our backyard. I was like, oh yeah, this is it. I'm going to be here. So
how old were you then?
Well, probably 18. Probably 18.
How did you fire it up?
I put in a gas line and built my own burners and did a suspended catenary arch on it, and sounded like a 747 taking off in the backyard. My parents hated it.
Luckily, no fires in the neighborhood.
No. But yeah. So.
Wow. Yeah. Cause I think some of my early stuff is just going through school, and I always really, really loved art. Luckily, I had the support of a lot of my teachers. Sometimes they give me extra time to just do little drawings or whatever. And I really appreciated that. And, both my parents were kids of the Depression, and they kind of scratched their heads at, yeah, that's okay, but how are you gonna make a living at that stuff? So, but yeah, I think it's just a lot of support from teachers and fellow students, when I was a kid growing up, really helped out and nurtured me.
Yeah, did teachers play a similar role for you, Michael, or were there other adults who kind of encouraged you, and were there significant figures that encouraged that curiosity?
I didn't really have that many artists or art teachers through high school or junior high that were terribly influential on me. But once I got to junior college, then I had some teachers that were, it was the dawn of personality awareness. You take Psychology 33 and learn how to be present now and things like that. So there was a lot of emphasis on process and paying attention and performance and participation, that kind of thing, that was happening once I got into junior college. And then when I came up to go to UCSB, I had some great teachers that really inspired me. Bill Rohrbach, one that we both had, and Michael Arntz and Sheldon Kaganoff and Jigs Pearson and Gary Brown.
Yeah. Gary Brown for me too.
They were my icons.
Yeah, well, and that's how I first met Michael too. I mean, so I was a little.
That was one of the questions that I had was how you guys first met.
He was at a gay bar. No, it was. He was wearing chaps and I was wearing a cowboy outfit. No, but it was at school. He was doing his grad work, and I just came in as an undergrad, and it was through. She's a bunch of the old guys. Like Bill Rohrbach was a painting teacher. Richard Ross, a couple of years later, was just starting out as a printmaking teacher. And then Howard Fenton was a big influence on me also. William Dole was a really big one for me also. And then that's how I also met Chris Johnson, who's another mutual friend who's the head of the department here at Laguna Blanca. And he helped me get the job here at Laguna, in fact. But, it was a pretty golden, I felt it was golden. Like Mike was there, Chris Johnson, Mary Seamster, Hank Pitcher, a lot of icons of the Santa Barbara art scene were just going out to school then at that time. I wasn't in their range, but they were all doing their grad work and stuff like that. So it was pretty exciting. And they're very friendly. Everybody, would take you under their wing and help you out. So it was good.
So both of you guys have, one of the questions I have is, both of you guys have talked, well, actually Doug mostly, but both of you a little bit have talked about the importance of teachers. And Doug, obviously you teach at Laguna Blanca now, and Michael, you've taught at UCSB and City College. So one of the things I was curious about was that interaction between being a teacher and being an artist. I'm curious what either of you would say the greatest satisfaction of being a teacher is, and what's the greatest frustration of being a teacher?
I think that being a working artist at the time, I mean, I even when I started teaching at San Marcos High School, I was making art. And so I really wanted to give them the experience of doing something magnificent, something that was profound and inspirational. And one of the classes that I taught all throughout was advanced painting and that kind of thing. And I had framing material and canvas and nail guns and stretcher bars, and they'd have their beginning classes to get up to that point. And then as soon as they felt like they were ready to do something interesting, they'd come up and say, you know, I want to do a painting of a bathing suit that's 5 feet by 7 feet. I'd go, okay. And so we'd build the stretcher bars and stretch it out and gesso it, and they'd start painting. I was fortunate to have a really large classroom, and I had 20 easels all the way around the room with giant paintings on them, and do an art exhibition with them every year. But it was the idea that I kind of really knew where I was coming from. I wasn't a hobby painter or a hobby artist or anything like that. I had a studio. After I would leave them, I would go down to the studio and I would work. And so trying to blow their minds every chance that I could with showing them how good they were or how good they could be. And it was probably the closest thing to not working I've found.
Mm. Mm. And did you, and how did that go in trying to blow their minds? Were you successful?
Oh, it was great. It was great. It was, you come in and put music on and show slides of artists and have discussions on aesthetics and teach them real techniques about how to paint and how to use oil or how to use a squeegee or how to use, all the different ways that you could do it. And the richness of our heritage that you could bring forward with all the new technology. You could get in the classroom in the morning and do a PowerPoint on exactly what you wanted to talk about that morning, and give them a PowerPoint with historical references of, Jasper Johns or Doug Edge or, somebody that you really wanted them to see, and then get them going in their own direction. And then it was pretty much like an upper division class where they could come in with their own ideas. And I never had trouble with kids that weren't interested or wanted to disappear or, that kind of thing. It was always, they would stimulate each other and they would go, wow, what are you making now? And then go over and help this one out. And it was a great experience. Just really fantastic. Right, Doug?
Yeah, well,
Like that.
I think Michael comes from a really strong background. When I first got out of college, teaching wasn't even on my radar because I just didn't think that I had anything to offer anyone else. I was still stumbling around, trying to find my way as an artist, trying to find my voice and direction. And so, I veered off into a lot of different things. I worked, did graphic design, did a little work for movies, but I was a waiter for too many years, and just spinning my wheels kind of. And then this opportunity came up, and I think it solidified for me a lot of ideas. And I had done some workshops and after school programs and stuff, but it really helped me to get further organized and solidify my direction when I became a teacher. And then, just like Mike said, it's kind of like a really great thing, to share your passion with another person. And sometimes, they really get into it and they have that shared passion too. They're not sure, or they're not fully formed, or they're not sure where to take it, and it's just, for me, I'm more like a facilitator to help nurture them and to help develop them and kind of nudge them in the direction that they're kind of going, and maybe also expose them, like Michael, to other influences and things that have been done around the globe. And I think that's the greatest thing is we get to share part of our spirit and lives and experience with these young people. And another great thing, I get to steal all their great ideas. It's like, oh, that is really great. And then boom, get to steal their ideas. And it's so fresh, it's great. Thank you, students.
One of the questions that was emailed in is someone was, the question was that art seems like a very hands-on, tactile experience. And so the question is, what's it like to be teaching art remotely? And how do you, and they were also curious how you're structuring those online lessons.
That would be you, Doug.
Well, for me, it was, I mean, there's some people who are doing it really, really well. I'm still learning, you know, I'm kind of a Luddite still. It is something to really switch gears with. For me, you know, and for Mike, you know, when you're in the studio with your kids, boom, you're right there, you're feeding off that energy. You can see directly what they're doing. You can see how they're holding their brush or how they're putting the pressure on their pencil and shit. You know, and with this now, you really can't see, you just see, oh, here's a picture that I did, or they put it into a folder and we all review it later. But it's been quite a switch. I don't find it as satisfying, but it's what we're doing now and we're trying to make the best of it. So I'm just trying to, you know, give kids introduce specific little instances of artists or genres throughout history, and then we kind of build off from there, and then they do projects accordingly. And we have weekly reviews of their work and stuff, and it's different. Not my ideal situation, but I think it's, for the most part, I think everybody is just trying to do the best they can. It's a whole new paradigm, so just what it is,
Yeah, it is. Yeah, I mean, we're doing this interview over Zoom.
Yeah, it's challenging, but it's fun too. I think
instead of in person.
You know,
yeah. It allows for some new things, but it definitely restricts some stuff that we counted on in the past. You're adjusting your brim there, Doug, is reminding me to say that I like your hat.
There you go. Check that out. Oh, and then also.
Yeah, great T-shirt as well. Yeah.
Got to represent, you know.
Yeah, absolutely.
I got to get a hat like
the
that.
Swag. Yeah. Nice work. Yeah, we got to get you a hat, Michael. That's I think we can offer that as a swag of being so kind to do this.
Talk to Wanda. That's who I bought it from.
Yeah, absolutely. Wanda Venturelli.
All right.
Who's been fantastic to facilitate all the merchandise. She's been amazing. So one of the things I'd love to do is each of you guys has selected a piece of art to talk about. And the question I asked you guys was to just talk a little bit about how that piece illuminates your process, how you think, whether that's a method of preparation or discoveries during the creation of it, or the refining of something as it started, you know, in any kind of point in that process is interesting. So Michael, maybe we'll start with you. Let me pull this up here. There we go. That's this needs to be full screen. Hang on. Let's make this better. There we go. That's what we want.
There you go.
Nice.
You can see all the combines behind the piece in the foreground. This is a
where was this photo taken?
That's in our studio. That's in Doug and my studio in the Funk Zone. And a lot of my early work before I ever started painting or doing anything like that was more conceptual work. Like I would build sweat houses that I would then leave in an area and document with photographs, and do a sweat and document the sweat. And so a lot of my work was process driven and kind of more performance documentation, that kind of thing, conceptual. And this is a newer piece. What was that, 2 years ago, Doug, that we had that show?
Yeah.
2 years ago. I've got a friend now that's doing, he remodels Airstream trailers. And he gave me a piece of an Airstream trailer. And my graduate work, my MFA, is in ceramic sculpture. And so I've always been interested in the idea of vessels and what they imply and what they are, that type of thing. And so when I was fooling around with this Airstream piece, I wasn't really sure what I was doing with it, but I knew that there was it held something for me. I didn't know what I could do with it. I didn't know, I've got many photographs of it where I'm just fooling around with it. I'm just tweaking it in one way or another and seeing what it looks like that way. And the base that it's on right there is a piece that I did for another sculpture that I ended up not building, and I just happened to have it in the studio. And so once I got the kind of the vessel formed, I set it on top of that base, and it just kept looking at me. You know, I was like, okay, that's really, it's kind of a muse, a face that's staring at me. My original studio on South Zapata Street was right next to Santa Barbara Scrap Iron and Metal. And he let me have a key. So when I was down there late at night, I could go wander through the junkyard and find freeway signs and airplane parts and drag them over to my studio and then settle up with him the next day. And so a lot of my work.
Can we see some of those materials in the background of this piece?
Yeah, you can see in the right directly behind it, there's an airplane wing and aircraft aluminum and a propeller and freeway signs and all of that kind of stuff. And so like Doug does these wonderful sculptures with unexpected objects juxtaposed in a way that's compelling and somehow visually rewarding. I look at his work and I see mine as being similar in many ways, just a little bigger, like bigger pieces. I don't know. Yeah, I don't know why, but so a lot of my work is combines, although I'm painting now, but sculpture is still kind of my go-to source when I'm working.
Yeah, and I love how you were talking about how you got this big hunk of metal there, and it just seemed to be looking at you, like what did you say, that it was staring at you or something? Yeah,
it felt like it had something going on, and then I saw the face in it, and
Yeah, it reminds me a lot. I read a definition of, it was actually a definition of a painting recently, a painting as opposed to a picture, and that a painting is a piece of art that is present in the room with you, that you have a sense in looking at it, that the piece sort of, it bodies in front of you, that it has kind of a sense of presence. You walk into a room and it confronts you. As opposed to something that's just a picture, which is sort of static, and it's more a reference to the past than it is to the presence.
I like that.
Yeah, it's good.
Well said.
I liked it too, and I wish I could remember. I wish I could remember who said it, but I can't. I'll look it up and I'll post it in the show comments or something. I just read it recently. Yeah.
Well, I think it's pretty neat too. If you come down to the studio and look at Mike's work, how he really mixes up the sculptural with painting too. Like some of those in the background, there's sculptural pieces, yet they've been heavily worked on with painting, grinding back, removing, and then painting some more, and then also his shaped canvases. So it's real interesting how that he's kind of straddling the fence on a lot of different things and trying out new forms and modes of expression. It's fun to come down to the studio and see all the work there.
Absolutely, yeah. Let's throw out the address of the studio here, and for anyone who wants to. I mean, I guess it's kind of hard to swing by during coronavirus right now, but in the future.
Yeah, it's 121 Santa Barbara Street, right across the street from Llama Dog.
Very good.
The surfing guy, this blue surfing Quonset hut.
Yeah, there's an image of the studio back in the slideshow. I can share it again in just a minute. Cool. Well, let me turn it over to your piece, Doug.
Sure.
Pull it up here for just a second, and then we can look at that.
Yes. So I chose several. I do a little bit of everything, a little bit of collage, a little bit of assemblage, and mark making. But and I chose this piece because this actual piece we have a tie with. Casey purchased this piece. But
yeah, so I was lucky enough to be struck by it. It bodied in front of me at the Ready to Hang show at Community Arts Workshop, and I'm like, I gotta have that. So it's unfortunately I'm not filming this from my office at the Cobb, but it's hanging there right now. So.
Oh, good. Yeah. Well, I think like Mike too. We both like to juxtapose different objects together, and especially for me as a collage person, collage is an easy way for me to just play with ideas, and with collage too, and the assemblage that I do, it's a mix of items that had a specific duty or purpose. Like this background of this piece was a Japanese movie poster, and then that I gotten in the past. I collect a lot of papers and ephemera. And then the foreground is a vintage, just an old GE light bulb case. And so this is one of my more minimal pieces. Usually I try to use minimal pieces and put together or smash up together images that create like this hybrid of the use of space, negative space, color. This is actually a real attempt for me to use more color because most of mine are very monochromatic.
Yeah, the colors spoke to me right away. How many pieces of paper are in this?
I think just two.
It's just two. So it's just the poster and then the light bulbs on top.
It might be, no, I think it's, no, it is just two. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Foreground is, the foreground is just the GE light bulb holder. And then the back, I'd use part of the poster. I think I used the head of, there's part of you see that green up there? That's the kimono of a geisha. And I used her in another piece. And I think to the right, there's that guy with the brown pants and the checkered or that blue top. I used part of that on something else. And I cut up some of the letters for some other pieces. So I really cannibalized a lot of these pieces of paper. But this was just an experiment for me also to use more color and to, lately I've been trying to see how much I can pare down the image just with as little as possible, signposts and stuff. And I have an idea, and sometimes it comes along really great. Sometimes it doesn't, but I like to not have a super concrete or literal reading in all of my work. This is, a little bit more the vague, vague head scratcher one. But yeah, I enjoy it too. It's
that was a question I had of how I guess I would think of it as like conceptual versus instinctual. As far as putting these pieces together, how conceptual are they? It's like, oh, I'm going to put these things together and it's going to tell this, versus, how much of it is just like, well, that sort of speaks to me somehow. I'm going to stick that over there and maybe I'll put that there. And how does that kind of work for you?
Well, I think it's, kind of like the way Mike works too. I think it's a little bit of both. It depends on the piece. Sometimes things come together easier. Sometimes I'm just looking at how the flow of things, like, you notice maybe like the way that the fold in the top of the kimono leads on down, your eye down to the light bulb, and then that light bulb just extends out to that left bottom corner with the calligraphy there, and then the sleeve of the guy is kind of extending that way too. Those look almost like eyeballs which are hidden by the by the thing on the guy at the bottom, or I guess they could even be breast, up if you go further up. But
yeah, totally.
There's a lot of different things in there. And then for me, just the colograph, the color, and then the implied motion of the writing and everything is what intrigues me.
So what's it? I mean, when you're sitting in the studio working on a piece like this, what's that process like? I mean, because you sent me an image of your studio, and actually, let me see. I can probably find it here. But it's just, it's you've got a whole bunch of images up on the wall, and so are you kind of intentionally like looking through one piece of paper at a time? Do your eyes just kind of cross and you just sort of instinctively grab something? Like, how does that sort of talk through how that process works for you?
It depends how my prescription medication is working at the time. Like all of us, and whether Mike and I have had a cocktail or not. But at the studio, that's where I primarily do most of my collage work. And so, yeah, that's my work desk. I put a lot of stuff in the front just to use as inspiration, and maybe, mostly for inspiration, just sometimes some newer stuff. But I'll pull out just a whole series of paper that I may want to start up as backgrounds, and then some other pieces that I think are kind of interesting or that kind of speak to me and speak to the papers that I want to use. And a lot of times it's hit or miss. I mean, I make a lot of stuff, but I don't show a lot of it. A lot of it's crap, which is fine too. I think like all of us, you just keep doing it because you're on this lifelong journey of creating and learning and just going, oh, that's a bunch of crap, or, oh, this is not too bad. Maybe I'll wait on this. And so it's just, for me, it's just a process too, just doing a lot of work, and your daily inspiration or for that minute just pop up, it's like a culmination of all that. I'm just I'm at the studio here at school, and I'm looking at a thing of Mickey Dvorak of the announcement that he had at Sullivan and Goss. And I took a drawing class from him at UCSB. And I remember in our drawing class, he said that, and I'm kind of paraphrasing this, but I still relate it to my students, is that when you're doing a drawing, when you place the pencil on the piece of paper, it's a culmination of all your experience up until that very point, and you're recording and using all that energy and information into and applying that to your drawing. And I think that's like any artist, you know, we gather all this information, whether it be subliminal and tones, shapes, smells, boom, 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 things that we see, and it just gets osterized in the brain then, and it just comes out in bits and spurts, and sometimes it comes out really easily, other times you got to work at it. So it's kind of hit or miss sometimes.
I love that. So speaking of context, one of the other things I was curious about was the Funk Zone itself, where you've had a studio for it's more than 35 years now, right, Michael?
Yeah, since I think 1979, I had my first studio on Salsapuedes in McNall's, kind of where the recycling center is right now, but it burned down. But I was over there for
the studio, not the recycling center.
No, not the recycling center wasn't there yet, but that was a great space. There were a lot of artists that had studios here. Michael Schmidt had one in the neighborhood, and Ron Hollywood, who was an interesting character down there. But it was a very vital area, and I would go down to that studio and stay till late at night. At that point in time, I was teaching at La Colina Junior High, I think. And so oftentimes I would be down there till 1 or 2 in the morning, and then have to make it to school by 7, you know, to get to start over again. Now, if it gets dark, I'm home. But back then, and then when I got this studio, the new studio in the Funk Zone was 1990, I think. And it was owned by Janet Nancaro, who was a former student of mine. She owned that whole block, the Nancaros and Caro's Restaurant and all of that kind of stuff. And I said, my studio's gone. I need a new space. Have you got anything for me? And she goes, well, I've got this really derelict Quonset hut. And she gave it to me for a really great price. And I put in the electricity and put up the walls and put in the lights and painted it. And it's been a great spot. And when I got Doug to come into the studio as my studio mate, I felt like I had attained some sort of sainthood to get that going on. To get the national
when did you join the studio, Doug?
It was about, I don't know, what, 6 years ago, something like that?
Has it only been 6 years?
6 or 7. Yeah, I don't know. I can't,
maybe,
you know,
10?
AARP brain, I can't remember all this. It's been a while, but yeah, because, well, see, it's been really great because, so, you know, Michael and I have kept in touch since college. And then I used to visit his studio when it was near the scrapyard, because, and then another mutual friend, Lothar, didn't he share the space a little bit for a while? Or
Chris Johnson shared the space
for
a while. And
true.
Rex Marchbanks.
Yeah, and Rex. Yeah. And then so we kept in touch. And so I used to visit the studio that, you know, he has right now that we share. And he mentioned, oh, we got an empty space. And so my wife had been threatening to throw all my stuff out of the garage and, you know, stuff. And she goes, you better get this stuff out of here. It's like, okay. And so it just turned out really great. Warren Schulteis was moving out. And so it was great. It was very good, very fortunate.
What was the Funk Zone like when you first moved in to that studio, the one that you guys are in right now, Michael?
There was.
What were your neighbors? Who were your neighbors?
Maggie McFly's, or what was the restaurant down in the corner? There was one restaurant there that had live music. They had Ricky Lee Jones and Steve Earle and all kinds of interesting people down there. So that was kind of the only draw anywhere in the vicinity. There was nothing else there. It was industrial space, research places that were building. Oceaneering International was one of the places down there, and just warehouse spaces that people had as creative spaces. But once the Funk Zone started, it went from, I was really the only artist down there except for what was the sculptor's name that just recently passed away, that did the he was over by behind the beach house.
Oh,
God, I'm drawing a blank on his name, but wonderful, wonderful
Donald.
human. What?
Don?
God, I can't remember. But he and I we were the only ones that had studios down there.
Yeah.
That I knew of at the time for many years. And then now, how many are down there now? We've got 30 artists down there.
Yeah, there's a lot.
Studios, and it's so much fun down there now. I mean, you just wander around into each other's studios and galleries, and
yeah, those Friday art walks in the Funk Zone are fantastic.
They're really, really fun, and the restaurants but for forever it was no man's land down there. I mean, it was tumbleweed.
So how did you see it? How did you see the neighborhood start to change over time?
Well, I had Rex Marchbanks, who was one of my dearest friends, had the studio below me, and so we had keys to each other's studios, and he would come up and mess things up in my studio and draw on things and go back down, and so that was always fun. Then he passed away in like 2007 or something like that, and then it's been the surfboard shop down below, and there've been all kinds of creative people in the area, but now with as many artists are down there, it's just wonderful. I mean, Saul Hill and Marlon Daggett and
Karen Lear, Barbara,
yeah, and Michael,
everybody who shares your studio as well.
That's true. I've been very fortunate to have some really wonderful studio mates down there. Warren Schulteis and Chris Johnson, and well, Chris never shared this one, but it's been good. It's been really it's fun to have the energy of someone working on something there, and you can talk about it and kick it around a little bit, So
and then there's Gene Densel and Terry Duffy there now, And
right.
So that makes it really fun. And then actually Gene has another studio down the bend at the Mason Street Studios, I think, too.
Right.
So yeah, it's a great area. Well, even when I moved in, which is fairly recently, I mean, you could go in there any time of day. You wouldn't have to worry about parking. It was like dead zone, especially after 5, after everybody was closing up shop, their welding shop or plumbing shop or whatever. Nobody was down there, and you can walk around naked up and down the street, and nobody would ever bother you. There was nobody, and so it was great. And now it's just different. It's fun in some ways, and then sometimes you go, God, what's going on? But it is a lot more communal now. There's a lot more sense of community with all the artists there, which makes it really nice. Yeah,
there's a huge amount of life and energy anytime down in the Funk Zone, but it's also really busy, and so there's I imagine there's a certain amount of distraction associated with that.
Yeah. Well, and then I think for everybody on our block, there's that little cloud hanging over us. Like there's that development. The whole block was sold, though, so there's going to be a hotel, condos, and retail spaces there. They're going to bulldoze down the block, and it's not going to be as funky as it used to be. Yeah.
I think we've got a couple more good years.
Yeah.
Before they get anything through.
Yeah, we're hoping so.
Planning commission.
Yeah. I'm curious how you guys feel about that, because this is sort of an old story, and it almost feels a little bit like it's just kind of the life cycle of a neighborhood. It sort of feels almost like an ecosystem, and it's like you got a little ecosystem that's kind of quiet. There's not a lot going on, and then the artists move in, and they start to enliven it and make it cool, and then you got a few coffee shops, and you got a few wineries, and then it really starts to take off, and then you have residences, and then it gets too expensive, and the artists have to leave, and it just it happens over and over again in neighborhoods in many cities. How does that? I'm just kind of curious how what your guys' experience of that is like.
Well, it's like Doug was saying. There's that little cloud that's hanging over your head where you don't know. I mean, I got a text message from Dan Levin, and he was taking a picture of notice of development on our block, and I'm like, oh no, not now, because we've known about this for 6-7 years probably.
Something like that, yeah.
And nothing's happened with it, and then all of a sudden Dan kind of raising the red flags, like, what's going on? Are we gonna have to move out? And Saul Hill has moved out, and he's at Laguna Plaza, and Marlon Daggett is over there too. And it's interesting to see what's happening. And it's hard to find spaces. It's hard to find. I mean, we have an 1,800 square foot studio space with 12-foot high ceilings, and the rent's affordable. You know, I mean, it's just one of those things that you just can't find anywhere else.
Yeah.
It's pretty interesting. Although, on a good note, they just rented out below me to Andy and Meadow Rose, who are both, one's a photographer and one's an artist. And then the other space where Lucy Harvey used to be in the band, they've rented out to a jeweler. So as long as they're renting places out, I'm optimistic that we'll get to stay there a little bit longer.
Yeah. Yeah, that's true. I think it's kind of interesting too, especially for Santa Barbara, where real estate is at such a premium. You know, for being such a small town, we didn't have like the large industrial spaces of like the larger cities, you know, that died out, and then the artists moved in, and then they got gentrified, and then they moved out. We haven't had that luxury of even, well, we've had light industry and stuff like that, but it's just way different. And I think for artists to find affordable spaces is really, really tough. And I feel so fortunate that I got to get in with Mike and the rest of the folks down there. I was just, you know, very, very appreciative and grateful that happened. So, yeah, it ought to be interesting. I don't know what we're going to go after this.
Yeah, it'll be interesting to see what the next few years hold. Is, you know, will a new funk zone emerge someplace else in Santa Barbara? You know, how will that evolve over time in Santa Barbara?
Yeah, Goleta seems there was some development, you know, a lot of studio space. People were moving out to Goleta too.
I've heard that.
Yeah, so it's been several years for that, so we'll see what happens. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, as long as we're on the subject of history, I'm curious to hear you guys just talk about the evolution of the Santa Barbara art scene in general. You know, both of you guys have been here for a number of decades, and I'm just kind of curious to hear you guys talk a little bit at sort of tracking those changes, how things have felt and shifted over the years.
I don't know.
It's a big question. Mike? I know it's sort of hard to know where to start, but yeah.
Well, it's just from a really quick off the top of my head, it's been really interesting. I mean, we have such a rich subculture here, you know, with the Latino culture embedded into what's happening here in Santa Barbara, and it's such a dichotomy of wealthy, and then some middle class, and then, you know, our lower working class, you know, and then I think right now it's even spread even further. But so we have a lot of Latino influence here, and then there's a lot of the kind of famous people came here to vacation and start, you know, having studios and stuff here, or working from here, at least spent some time here. I mean, Diego Rivera spent some time here in Hope Ranch. He spent his summers so doing some paintings and stuff a long time ago, and then it's just really evolved. And I think there's been a lot of people coming in and out of Santa Barbara who are pretty big names. And either they went to school here or passed through, and some have stayed here. There was a big guy, Roger Brown was out there, or was that, he was from Chicago originally, and then he had a studio near here, and, you know, the Mountain Drive people, and that was all before my time, but yeah, it's a pretty exciting time. I think the toughest part is the whole art market's changing, and so people are changing studio practices, and some people are doing most everything on a computer nowadays, some of them too. So it's an interesting place to be in time. Pretty exciting. I think Mike might have a more richer and more depth into what's happened here in Santa Barbara, but you know, that's just my.
I don't know. I think that you were fairly succinct about that. I mean, so many interesting artists have come and gone from here.
Yeah.
I mean, I had visiting professors at UCSB that were from England and from, you know, New York and all kinds of places that, and then they would have studios here. Doug Edge was an iconic figure. Dick Dunlop,
Yeah.
Joan Tanner. There's just some, Donald Davis was the name I was trying to think of earlier. Thank you for that. But there have been some really profound instrumental artists in terms of the vocabulary of contemporary work. Kenny Bortolazzo at Sullivan Goss, and Mary Hebner, and just Dane Goodman and Marie Sheff, and there are just so many that I don't. Richard Ross and Kip Fulbeck and the wonderful professors at UCSB and City College. City College is the #1 junior college in America, and it's because they have, well, they can live in Santa Barbara, but it's really a rich, wonderful place with great instructors, particularly in the art department.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, and Westmont, we've got Tony Askew out there, and all the
Chris
people.
Rupp and Nathan Huff and
right. That does seem to be one of the big assets of the Santa Barbara art scene, is just the number of really incredible working artists who are also here and can kind of sustain, sometimes some of them sustain their practice through teaching and at City College and Westmont and UCSB. It's a huge asset for the community.
Well, yeah, I think that's one thing that, Mike touched on, is just that for such a small town population-wise, there's a huge breadth and depth to the amount of artists that are here, really good artists too, not just, the people who are doing the paint by the numbers thing, but some really thoughtful, internationally and globally enriching artists. Raphael's dots, and all the people he mentioned too. I mean, it's just kind of amazing for as small a town as it is. It's pretty rich. I think we're really fortunate, and everybody either knows each other, knows of each other, and everybody's really supportive. I think that's another really, it's not as backbiting or cutthroat as you hear some of the other places around, like maybe early days of New York or Chicago or San Francisco or LA or something like that. I think here it's pretty communal, and everybody really watches out for each other and helps each other out. Because, I have a line in on all this canvas if you want to go in on this or whatever, so.
What do you attribute that richness to, the number of quality artists that are here? Is there any one thing or combination of factors?
I think having the university here, for one thing, is that you've got the art museum, and you've got positions for people to teach and live and work and that type of thing. Rick Stitch, and I mean, there's just so many people here that teach on so many different levels. And I think having Westmont and City College and UCSB really makes it a wonderful place. And you get the MFA students coming up, and they're great shows that they put on with all their conceptual and interesting cutting edge new ideas that they experiment with. And it's just, there's always something going on, which is great. I mean, the art walks are a nice addition, I think.
Yeah,
getting to go around and visit studios and galleries and that type of thing. But it's been a great place to be. And like Doug said, everybody is pretty warm to each other. You can talk to Hank Pitcher, you can talk to Kenny Bortolazzo, you can talk, all Dane Goodman. I mean, all these great people that are fantastic artists that are really good friends and acquaintances, and there's a feeling of camaraderie and I don't know. It's been a nice place, and not the big backbiting or any of that kind of stuff like that.
Well, I think that's been my experience of one of the biggest assets Santa Barbara has in general is that feeling of camaraderie. I think in most of the industries that I've lived in, whether it's nonprofits or theater or some of the different jobs that I've had, it's I think one of the great qualities of Santa Barbara.
Yeah, I think there's there's that whole sense of artistic integrity, and then that sense of community, like everybody's mentioned, and then I just lost my thought, and then it evaporates. But yeah, I don't know. It's like, well, it's that AERP kind of situation. But yeah, and part of it is, I think the history is too, and there's been a lot of support for, especially a smaller place, the little galleries that have popped up. Some have stayed, some have gone through the ages. That have been really supportive of the arts here too, like Sullivan Goss, contemporary ones now, but then going back all the, there was a little tiny one, Visible Light, and then, God, what's her name, that used to be on the beach, and then she was on Chapala.
Schaffner
Pamela Auchincloss.
Auchincloss, that was a great one.
Yeah, and a lot of these, galleries who have just really supported the local arts, but yet they also brought in other influences from around the world here too, to kind of spotlight the area and to illuminate the public here, which has been really nice. So, and then we have all these organizations supporting the arts, CAW, Arts Fund, Arts Committee, there's a lot of organizations that are doing great work to not only support the arts on a public level, but educationally, and then outreach into underserved areas and underserved, people. And I think it's a good flourishing area.
Yeah.
So,
Well, guys, thank you so much for your time today. Really appreciate you answering all the questions and the great stories and insights. And thank you.
Thank you. It's the only way I get to see Doug.
We're like passing
happy to help.
Tonight.
Yeah.
So we'll see you guys.
Well, thanks so much. I really appreciate it. And I'll talk to you guys again soon.
All right. Thanks, Casey.
Thank you, Casey. Take care, buddy.
Take care.
We'll see you guys.
Bye.
Bye.